The Chesapeake Bay ferry left the dock at 6:47 in the evening, right on schedule, the way things rarely were in Daniel Hargrove's life anymore. He stood at the stern railing of the upper deck, collar turned up against the October wind, watching the Baltimore skyline pull away from him like a slow exhale. The glass towers caught the last of the dying sun and threw it back in long orange blades across the water. Somewhere behind him, a family was laughing, a child's shriek of delight at the spray, a father's low rumble of reassurance, and the sound reached him like noise from another country, familiar in shape, foreign in feeling. Daniel was 52 years old. He had a corner office on the 38th floor of a building that bore his company's name in brushed steel letters 4 feet tall. He had a car that cost more than most people's houses, a house that cost more than most people's neighborhoods, and a watch on his wrist that a jeweler in Geneva had spent 11 months constructing by hand. He also had an ulcer, a divorce that had been finalized 14 months ago without ceremony or tears, which was its own kind of devastation, and a board meeting in 9 hours that could determine whether 4,000 people kept their jobs or lost them. He had taken the ferry because his assistant, a careful young man named Marcus, who seemed to understand him better than most, had quietly suggested it 3 days ago. "You haven't left the building before 9 any night this week, sir. The ferry runs until midnight. It's 40 minutes each way. You used to like the water." Marcus had said it the way you say something to a man who you can see is slowly disappearing from the inside, gently, without looking directly at him. So here Daniel stood, on the water, trying to remember what he used to like. The bay was wide and gray-green, cut through with white from the ferry's hull. Gulls hung in the air above the wake like white punctuation, and the wind smelled of salt and cold, and something ancient that the city had no equivalent of. He gripped the railing with both hands and let it work on him, the way cold water sometimes works on a man who has been too long indoors. Not comfortable, exactly, but real. The realness was the point. He had his phone in his pocket. It had buzzed 11 times since he boarded. He had not looked at it once. The upper deck was less crowded than the lower cabin. Most passengers sought the warmth inside, pressing against the heated windows with their coffees and their phones. Out here, only a few stragglers remained. A college-aged couple sharing earbuds at the bow, an older man in a fisherman's jacket reading a paperback with gloved hands, and, some 20 feet to Daniel's left, a small girl in a wheelchair. He noticed her the way you notice something at the edge of your vision that stays there, not intrusively, just present. She was slight, maybe 10 or 11, bundled in a purple coat with a hood she'd pushed back so the wind moved freely through her dark hair. Her legs beneath a fleece blanket were impossibly still, the way legs are when they have been still a very long time. The wheelchair was practical, institutional, not the sleek kind that spoke of resources, but the kind that spoke of insurance battles and waiting rooms and the particular exhaustion of making do. She was looking up, or trying to. The ferry's outer railing ran at a height that cut across her sightline perfectly, a horizontal bar of painted steel that sat at precisely the wrong elevation for a child seated in a wheelchair. Above it, Daniel could see the sky clearly, a thing of extraordinary beauty at this hour, the western horizon burning amber and coral where the sun had just surrendered, the upper sky turning a deep cobalt that deepened as it rose, the first star of the evening appearing low and unwavering in the southeast. Below the railing, the girl could see the water. She kept adjusting her angle, leaning slightly, craning her neck, but the geometry was simply wrong. The sky stayed hidden. Daniel watched her try for a moment. There was something patient about it, something without frustration. She wasn't straining in anger, wasn't calling for anyone to help her, wasn't performing distress. She was simply trying, quietly and persistently, the way children sometimes do with things they haven't yet learned to give up on. Then she turned her head and saw him watching. He expected embarrassment, the usual social flinch of being caught staring. He felt his own face prepare to look away, the corporate armor assembling itself automatically. But the girl just looked at him with large, dark eyes that,
"She's okay." The voice came from behind him, a woman's voice, tired and careful, the kind of voice that has learned to contain alarm because alarm requires energy that has to be rationed. Daniel turned carefully, keeping Lily steady, and saw the mother. She was in her mid-30s, maybe. It was hard to tell because she had the particular agelessness that comes not from good genetics, but from exhaustion so deep it had simplified everything. Her hair was pulled back, a few strands blown loose by the wind. She held 2 paper cups of hot chocolate, one in each hand, and she was looking at her daughter floating above the ferry railing in the arms of a stranger, and her face held all of this: alarm, relief, assessment, something softer. "I asked him to," Lily said, still looking at the sky. "The railing was in the way. Mom, there are stars, a lot of them now." The woman looked at Daniel. He looked at her. He became suddenly acutely aware of what this looked like and felt a rush of something uncomfortable. Not guilt exactly, but the awareness of how the world had become a place where this kind of simple human moment had to be carefully explained. "I'm sorry," he said. "She asked. I should have waited for you. I apologize." The woman studied him for a moment with eyes that were the practiced instruments of someone who had spent a long time reading the intentions of strangers in hospital waiting rooms and intake offices and government counters. Then something in her settled. "No," she said. "It's okay. I'm Sarah." She moved closer, setting the hot chocolates on a nearby bench. "She's been trying to see over that railing for 20 minutes. 12 minutes, Lily corrected from the sky. "I timed it." "She does that," Sarah said. "Times things." "I like knowing how long things take, because then next time you know if it was worth waiting." She paused. The sky was worth 20 minutes, even 12. Daniel carefully lowered her back into the wheelchair. Lily submitted to this with the equanimity of someone who had made peace with the particular geometry of her life, the world regularly lifting you up only to put you back down, and finding it okay regardless. She immediately angled her neck back, trying to recover what she'd just had, but the railing was there again. "Thank you," she said to Daniel, directly, without deflection, the way children thank people when they mean it and haven't learned yet to be complicated about gratitude. "You're welcome, Lily." He straightened up, buttoned his collar against the wind, and his automatic setting would have been to nod politely, extract himself, return to the stern and the water and the weight of his 9 o'clock board meeting. He did not do that. He wasn't entirely sure why. It might have been the way she'd said, "I feel like I'm moving, but you can't tell." It might have been something simpler, the plain fact of her, this small person in her purple coat, with her careful eyes, attending to the world with an intensity he recognized but hadn't felt himself in years. "May I sit?" asked Sarah. She looked at him again with those assessing eyes. "Of course," she said. He sat on the bench. Sarah handed Lily one of the hot chocolates, and Lily accepted it with a careful reverence of someone who understood this was a treat, not a given. She held it in both hands and looked alternately at the sky and the water and Daniel. "Do you live in Baltimore?" she asked him. "I work there. I live," because the answer to where he lived had become complicated in the last 14 months. He lived in a house in Annapolis that was too large, that echoed, that had rooms he had not entered since the divorce. Near Annapolis. "We're going to visit my aunt in Annapolis. She has a dog named Biscuit. He's very fat. Mom says he's just fluffy, but I've done the research. I've met the dog, Sarah said, with the first smile Daniel had seen from her. She's right, he's fat. What kind of research? Daniel asked. I looked up the average weight for a golden retriever, which is what Biscuit is, and then I asked my aunt how much he weighs, and he's 16 pounds over. That's fat. That's thorough, Daniel said. I want to be a scientist when I grow up, Lily said, without particular fanfare. I want to study the atmosphere.
Sarah excused herself to use the restroom inside the cabin, and Daniel found himself alone with Lily in the way that happens sometimes on ferries and trains and other places of transit, the ordinary arrangements of the world briefly suspending themselves to place two people in unexpected proximity. Lily was quiet for a moment, watching a freighter's lights move across the far edge of the bay. Then she said, without preamble, I have spinal muscular atrophy. That's why I can't walk. It makes the muscles weak. It started when I was 4. She said it the way she'd told him about the mesosphere, informationally, without performance. This is a fact about the sky. This is a fact about my body. I'm sorry, Daniel said. I don't really need people to be sorry, she said, not unkindly. It's just what is. I'm used to it. I'm not in pain or anything, mostly. I just can't walk, and some other things are getting harder. She said this last part a shade more carefully than the rest, like a musician who has learned to play around a difficult passage. My arms are okay, though. I can still draw and type. I'm writing a book about the atmosphere. Really? It's not finished. I've been working on it for 6 months. It's going to be for kids younger than me to explain the sky in a way that makes them want to look at it, because I think most kids stop looking when they grow up, and I want to give them a reason to keep looking. Daniel was quiet for a moment. The freighter lights moved steadily across the water. Somewhere on the deck below, a child was laughing, the sound rising through the hull. What have you written so far? He asked. The part about the troposphere. That's the lowest part where we live, where weather happens, and the part about the stratosphere, which is where the ozone layer is. The ozone layer is like a sunscreen for the whole planet. She looked up at the sky. I want to write about the thermosphere, but that's the really high part, and I don't want to get it wrong, so I've been reading a lot first. A pause. I read really fast. My teacher says I read at a 10th grade level. I'm in 5th grade. That's remarkable, Daniel said, and meant it without qualification. I have a lot of time to read, she said simply. When you're in the hospital a lot, you need something good to do. She tilted her head at him. Why are you on the ferry by yourself? Don't you have family? The questions struck him with the precision of something thrown by someone who doesn't know they're throwing. He looked at the water for a moment. He has a son. He lives with his mother. He's 16. Do you see him a lot? Not as much as I should. Lily considered this with the same methodical interest she brought to atmospheric science. Why not? Because I made mistakes, Daniel said. The words came from somewhere he hadn't accessed in a long time, bypassing the usual filters. I thought work was the most important thing for a long time, and by the time I understood it wasn't, some things had already... He stopped. Some things had already moved in a direction they couldn't come back from. My dad is like that, Lily said. She said it without accusation, without the kind of anger that often lives around that sentence in adults. She said it like a scientist reporting data. I think it was because of me being sick and everything being hard. Mom never says that, but I'm pretty good at understanding things people don't say. Daniel looked at her. It's okay, she said. I have my mom, and I have Biscuit when we visit, and I have the sky. She looked up at the stars with proprietary affection, the way you look at something that has been reliably yours. The sky never leaves. He didn't know when he had last felt anything pierce him so cleanly. He was a man who had developed, over decades, an extraordinary capacity for not feeling, not coldness exactly, but efficiency, the streamlining of emotional response in the service of function.
He had built it deliberately after his own father had died when Daniel was 13. After the particular grief of that had nearly undone him, he had decided at 13, standing at a graveside in November with his shoes soaked through from the wet grass, that the safest thing was to become someone who could not be undone. And here was an 11-year-old girl in a wheelchair on a ferry in the middle of the Chesapeake Bay, and she was quietly.
The ferry was 40 minutes from the eastern shore when Daniel asked Lily to tell him about the thermosphere. She turned from the stars with a surprised, delighted expression, the expression of someone asked about their great love in a context where they had not expected to be asked. "Okay," she said, sitting slightly straighter in the wheelchair. "So the thermosphere is from about 53 miles up to 380 miles up. That's where the International Space Station orbits. And here's the thing that most people don't know." She leaned forward slightly, a natural lecturer. "The thermosphere is actually very hot, like over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, but you wouldn't feel it because the air is so thin up there that the heat can't really transfer to you. You'd actually freeze. Heat and temperature feel the same to us, but they're not actually the same thing." "That's counterintuitive," Daniel said. "Yes." Lily looked pleased. "That's what I'm going to write in the book, that the sky is full of things that are not what they seem, things that feel cold but are hot, things that look still but are moving, things that look empty but are doing the most important work." She leaned back, satisfied. "I think the sky is a good lesson for everything." "What lesson?" She thought for a moment with genuine seriousness. "That things are more complicated than they look, and that the parts you can't see are often the most important." Sarah was watching her daughter with that unnameable expression again. She caught Daniel's eye and this time didn't look away, and there was a fullness in her look that contained everything: the exhaustion, the love, the terror, the specific pride of a parent who has produced something better than themselves and knows it and is afraid of losing it. Daniel looked away first, at the water, and felt something building in him that he didn't have good language for. It was not the clean emotion of a corporate narrative, not inspiration in the packaged sense, the kind his PR team generated at the annual company conference with carefully chosen stories and carefully engineered lighting. This was something raw, something that made his chest ache in the way a healed wound aches when the weather changes, an old pain finding new relevance. He had a son he did not know well enough. He had a life that had been stripped, one compromise at a time, of almost everything that had made the thermosphere worth knowing about, the things you couldn't see, the things that were not what they seemed, the important work happening in the parts that looked empty. He had told himself for years that what he was building was for something: the company, the wealth, the name on the building. He had told himself it was security, legacy, the construction of something lasting. And his marriage had quietly disassembled itself while he was in conference rooms, and his son had grown from a small boy who asked him questions about the sky to a teenager Daniel saw on alternating weekends, and neither of them knew how to talk to the other anymore. And somewhere in all of that, the something it was for had been misplaced, and he had not stopped to find it because stopping felt like losing. Lily had been watching him. "You're sad," she said. It was not a question. He started to deny it and then did not. "Yes," he said, "a little." "That's okay," she said, with the same equanimity she brought to everything. "The sky is also sad sometimes. That's what clouds are, kind of, the atmosphere processing something difficult." She looked up. "But it always clears." The lights of the eastern shore were close now, the ferry beginning its broad, gentle arc toward the dock. Other passengers were appearing from the interior cabin, gathering belongings, zipping coats, the ordinary machinery of arrival beginning to operate. Daniel looked at Sarah. "I'd like to give you my card," he said. I want to be clear about what I'm saying. This isn't pity."
He struggled with the sentence, which was not a struggle he was used to. He was professionally articulate, precisely spoken, a man whose words in meetings carried the weight of decisions that moved markets. But this felt different. This needed to be right. I run a company. We have a foundation. I have resources. I'd like to look into Lily's case, if that's something you'd be open to. Sarah looked at him with the eyes of a woman who had been given hope and had it withdrawn enough times to have developed a careful protocol around receiving it. I don't want charity, she said, quietly but directly. That's not what I'm offering. I don't know exactly what I'm offering yet. I wanted to ask first. He paused. I know what it sounds like, a stranger on a ferry. I understand if the answer is no. Sarah looked at her daughter, who had gone back to the stars, who was counting something, her lips moving slightly.
3 things happened in the 6 weeks that followed the ferry crossing, and they happened in this order. Daniel Hargrove called the chief medical officer of Johns Hopkins on a Saturday morning, a man he had played golf with exactly once at a fundraiser and had since exchanged occasional texts with about nothing in particular, and had a conversation that lasted 40 minutes and ended with a referral to the director of the hospital's neuromuscular disease clinic. He then called his foundation director, a careful woman named Dr. Osei, who had been trying to redirect his charitable giving away from buildings with his name on them and toward actual people for 3 years, and told her he wanted to fund a pediatric spinal muscular atrophy treatment initiative, starting with an immediate allocation sufficient to cover 1 full course of gene therapy and associated care. Dr. Osei, who was not a person easily surprised, was quiet for 5 seconds. "Who is she?" she asked. "Her name is Lily," Daniel said. "She's 11. She's writing a book about the atmosphere." The second thing that happened was that Sarah called him on a Tuesday evening, her voice carefully controlled in the way of someone managing a strong current. "The hospital called," she said. They said Lily has been accepted into a treatment program, that the funding has been—" She stopped. He heard her breath, the effort of it. "Mr. Hargrove." "Daniel," he said. "Daniel." She stopped again. I don't have words for." "You don't need to," he said. "How is she?" The sound Sarah made then was not quite a laugh and not quite a cry, but was the specific hybrid of those 2 things that only happens when something you had stopped allowing yourself to hope for becomes true. "She's asking if the hospital has any windows that face east because she wants to see the sunrise from her room after the procedure." "Tell her yes," Daniel said immediately. "I'll make sure of it." The third thing that happened was that Daniel's son, whose name was Owen, met Lily in the atrium of the hospital on the Thursday before her procedure, and they spent 90 minutes there, while Sarah went to sign paperwork, and Daniel sat at a respectful distance with a coffee, watching them. Owen was 16 and tall, with his father's dark coloring and his mother's careful eyes, and he was at the age where everything required a deliberate performance of not caring, and he had been visibly steeling himself on the drive over for the awkwardness of whatever this was going to be. Lily undid this in approximately 4 minutes. She asked Owen if he knew what the jet stream was, and Owen said, kind of, and she explained it with the precise enthusiasm.
The ferry docked at 7:31, the same as always. Some crossings look ordinary from the outside, a working boat on a working river, passengers going home. But occasionally, in the small, unremarkable spaces between departure and arrival, in the cold air above the water where a child asks a stranger for something simple and human, the world quietly rearranges itself, not with spectacle, not with ceremony, with a small pair of arms extending upward, and a man deciding, for the first time in a long time, to lift.